What's up, guys? This is Alex from the Duran, and I'm here with Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran.com. And today we're going to be examining the possibility that the Senate intelligence community is going to be bringing in Julian Assange and Christoforou Steele to testify. Okay, Alexander, I said community. I meant committee. I always get it. Maybe I'm getting it confused with the intelligence community. Everything's a community now. Yeah, everything's a community now. But this is the Senate committee that is investigating the Russiagate, the Trump-Russia collusion, election meddling thing. I don't even know what to call that anymore. And this is different than the House. Which has had its own probes into Russia election meddling and Trump-Russia collusion. Take us into the differences between how the House has been operating in relation to the election meddling and Trump-Russia collusion and all that, and how the Senate has been moving along, because it seems to me that the Senate has been much more unified, has been more methodical, and Richard Burr, I believe, who is heading the committee, also seems to have a lot more support from both sides of the aisle as they move forward, and it seems to me that they're wrapping up the conclusion of the Trump Russia collusion election meddling thing, but go into the differences and how each is heading in different directions.
I mean, there's a House Intelligence Committee and there is a Senate Intelligence Committee, and they're both committees that supervise the work of the intelligence agencies, the intelligence community that you spoke about. Now, the point is that the Republicans in the House of Representatives have now become very strongly pro-Donald Trump. They are solid behind Donald Trump. The Senate is a more traditionally bipartisan body, and that is reflected in the Senate Intelligence Committee. It has operated at a lower temperature. So people like that we've been hearing so much about, people like Gowdy and Nunes and Jordan, all these angry Republican representatives, they are in the House. The Senate Intelligence Committee is, as I said, is a calmer, more bipartisan body. And what has happened is that the House Intelligence Committee has become increasingly interested not in what the Russians were doing, because he concluded some time ago that there was no collusion between Donald Trump and his campaign and the Russians. It's been looking more at what the US intelligence community, specifically the CIA and the FBI and the Justice Department, were doing in basically spying on Donald Trump and on his campaign. So we've been hearing all of that coming out of the House Intelligence Committee. The Senate Intelligence Committee has remained rather more focused, because it's a more establishment body, if you like, on the original collusion story of whether or not there was collusion between the Russians and Trump and his campaign. And they're saying basically, and we'll probably come to that, they're now starting to express their conclusions.
Okay, so Richard Burr, I think, is saying that they haven't been able to find any collusion, obviously, but they're also surprise. But there's also whispers and chatter that they are thinking of getting Assange to testify and bringing in Christoforou Steele. And we've done many videos on Assange and Steele, and that sounds like a great idea to get Assange, because I'm sure Assange knows a lot of things, but I would imagine, and I want you to elaborate on this, Assange wouldn't just testify without maybe some quid pro quo. What's he going to get in return for divulging whatever information he may know, because he's without a doubt a key figure in unlocking the hacks or the thumbnail downloads, because a lot of people believe it wasn't a hack at all. And then you have Steele on the other side of the equation, the British spy, who is also a central figure in the creation and the fabrication of the Trump dossier. So what do you make of these whispers that these two central figures may be called in to testify to the Senate committee? And what do you think each of these figures can offer as far as shedding light onto the truth as to what really happened?
I think they're more than just whispers, actually. I think that there is definitely an agenda to bring them. And I said up to now that, there's more bipartisanship in the Senate Intelligence Committee than there is in the House Intelligence Committee. But I think we need to be a little careful about that, because I suspect that there are some people on the Republican side in the Senate Intelligence Committee and elsewhere who want to see Assange and Steele give evidence, because they are the two central people in the whole story. It is incredible, we've talked about this before, it is incredible that they have not been asked to give evidence up to now, because Assange is the prime witness in how WikiLeaks obtained the emails, the DNC emails and the Podesta emails, which is one side of the Russiagate story. And Christopher Steele and his extraordinary dossier, that makes him the key witness to the whole narrative that there was collusion between Donald Trump and the Russians, which is the other side of the Russiagate story. So these two key witnesses have not been called to give evidence up to now. And any investigation of these two issues, who provided who was behind the leaking of the emails from the DNC and Podesta, and whether there was collusion between the Russians and Donald Trump and his campaign, properly speaking, needs these two witnesses. And Robert Mueller and his team have not interviewed them. And here we see somebody or some people in the Senate Intelligence Committee saying that the Senate Intelligence Committee will. So I think that, as I said, there is an agenda here, because I think some people within the White House, within the Republican Party, within the Republican Party in Congress, suspect that Assange and Steele have tales to tell which may not actually correspond with the big Russiagate narrative, and that is why they have not been interviewed up to now. So I think this is a very interesting development indeed. Now, what will Assange want in return? Well, Assange is, as we know, trapped in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. There have been moves to get him out. The Ecuadorians now have made it very clear they want him to leave. He is extremely concerned that if he goes to the United States or is sent to the United States, he will face charges of some description. There is known to be a grand jury somewhere in the United States which has been looking into him. So I think what Assange will want is some reassurance from the United States, some sort of deal that he will be protected. And on an earlier program that we did, I think we saw that we got very close to that position. There was supposed to be an agreement between the US authorities and the Justice Department specifically, and the CIA for Assange to help with other leaks that involved CIA activities. And James Comey of the FBI sabotaged, he torpedoed that testimony and those agreements. And I suspect that some people in the United States are now looking to revisit that because they realize what a key witness Assange is.
Now, juxtaposition the fact that I believe it was the Senate that supported the intelligence community assessment that Russia did meddle in the elections, and that assessment was based on pretty ridiculous. It was based on a pretty ridiculous foundation. I mean, they were bringing in stuff that RT had reported in 2012 and stuff that WikiLeaks had reported, and that was their body of evidence to show that Russia somehow meddled in the elections. But the Senate backed that report. Yeah. So, do you think that there's a big part of the Senate committee, some of these senators who are never Trumpers or who are deep state swamp creatures, who are scared to death to have Assange and Steele divulge what they know, because what they know really, to me it seems, expose the swamp. I mean, it puts sunlight on the swamp, on the deep state, perhaps on Hillary Clinton's email scandal, perhaps on how corrupt the Democrat Party was, all these things. What do you think of that juxtaposition, that alongside with the fact that there are people in the Senate committee who do want to hear what Assange and what Steele want to say?
It's going to be incredibly difficult to navigate, because you're absolutely right. There is a large body of Republican never-Trumpers in the Senate. I mean, Donald Trump now, I think, has a secure position with the Republican Party in the House. He has lots of enemies still within the Republican Party in the Senate. He has his supporters also. I mean, people like Senator Grassley, who, to be clear, is on the Senate Judiciary Committee, not the Senate Intelligence Committee. I mean, he chairs the Senate Judiciary Committee. But he also has opponents. I mean, people like McCain, for example, Senator McCain, is a committed opponent of Donald Trump, even though, because of his illness, he's not perhaps as potent a force as he once was. But there are other people in the Senate who are extremely hostile to Donald Trump. Now, we discussed that extraordinary report that the Senate Intelligence Committee did, which basically said that, what the intelligence community had said about the Russian hacking was absolutely true. And I pointed out at the time that this appeared to have been based entirely on what the intelligence community said. They never went behind and looked at the evidence. And of course, since then, we've also had this indictment from Mueller, in which he claimed to have identified the various Russians who supposedly carried out that hack. And I pointed out that, again, the interesting thing about that particular indictment is that, again, it provided no evidence. I mean, we have all these declaratory statements that say that it was the Russians, that name particular Russians, but we don't see the evidence ever. And we're never going to be trusted with the evidence, it seems. Now, it seems to me that there are some people on the Senate Intelligence Committee who undoubtedly want to bring in Assange and want to bring in Steele so as to reinforce the Russiagate narrative. And that's why they did that report that we talked about previously. And it may be that when they question Assange and Steele, assuming they ever do, they will try to direct those questions in that way so as to reinforce the narrative and to embarrass Donald Trump. I think, and I don't think this is too complicated, I think there might be some people within the Senate Intelligence Committee who say to themselves, well, we published that report basically so as to give ourselves a little bit of cover, a little bit of room for maneuver, so that when we're able to talk to people like Assange and Steele, we can question them in ways that get closer to the truth without anybody being saying, well, look, you're Russian stooges and you're doing what Donald Trump wants. These are politicians, and politicians are, let's just put it this way, complicated people, and it would not surprise me that there might be some people in the Senate Intelligence Committee who think in that way. It is very interesting that they want to talk to Steele and to Assange, and it is also important to add what Senator Burr, who chairs the committee, said. The committee has seen no evidence of collusion between Donald Trump and his campaign and the Russians. Now that goes to the heart of the whole Mueller investigation, and it suggests that there are some people in the Senate Intelligence Committee who have basically seen that this collusion narrative is nonsense, and one wonders whether it isn't in order to show that it's nonsense that they want to bring Assange and Steele in. We shall see.
Right. How do you go back to where you mentioned that bringing in Assange and Steele could actually reinforce the Russia? I mean, I would think it would be the exact opposite.
Well,
but how do you think they could bend their words, and bend their questions so that they actually reinforce the Trump-Russia collusion? With a guy like Assange
these are sophisticated people, and they're intelligent people. We have to say that, and of course, a lot of it depends on how people are questioned. Mm-hmm. If they're questioned in a way that is intended to arrive at the truth, then I mean that will, I think, lead in certain very interesting directions that we've discussed about in other programs. If they're questioned in a way that is intended to reinforce the narrative that exists, to show up Assange, for example, as a liar and somebody who is in the pocket of Russian intelligence, and to show Christoforou Steele as a hero beset on all sides, then let us be absolutely clear about that. There are people who are professional advocates who are absolutely up to doing that. I mean, it would not convince you or me or many other people, but it might convince some people, perhaps people who already are inclined to believe that, but it would at least give some more credence to that sort of view. So it depends very much on how the cross-examination is conducted.
And I imagine, of course, the media, being very anti-Trump, would also support that narrative. But with these hearings, if Assange and Steele do get brought in, would they be public? Would they be open to the public, or would they be closed door?
We don't yet know, is the short answer. I am sure that initially the very first interviews would be public. What probably would then happen is that they would happen behind closed doors, and then we would see an alternation between things going on behind closed doors and then in public again. But the consistent pattern in these committee hearings, both at the Senate and the House, is that things that get said behind closed doors then get leaked. And there are lots of people out there who are listening to the leaks. Some of them are obviously the media, which, as you correctly say, is militantly anti-Trump and will spin anything that's said in an anti-Trump direction, and will certainly take any cues from hostile leaks from within the committees. But there are also people like Byron York, for example, who writes for Washington Examiner, who has been consistently accurate in reporting the leaks he's been given, and who's been consistently accurate in reporting the testimony, the behind-the-scenes testimony, as it actually takes place. But, I mean, I'm sorry to say this, for every person who reads Byron York, as you and I do, there are probably 100 people who read the New York Times or the Washington Post, and there are probably 1,000 people who listen to CNN, and 10,000 people who listen to MSNBC. So, you know, that is what we're up against. But, you know, the truth always gets said, and there is always alternative media out there. Right. And more and more people now are sensing that things are not being told, fully truthfully or accurately on mainstream media, are looking for their news increasingly elsewhere.
Right, right. And real quick, in a couple of seconds as we wrap this up, Alexander, will this get done, do you think, before the primaries in the elections in November?
This is the big question. I simply don't know. I mean, the time is. I've been saying this for weeks, even months now, ever since we got started doing our programs on the Duran. The Republicans have left this very, very late. Right. And the clock is ticking away all the time. There are rumours, by the way, so far uncorroborated and perhaps untrue, that Donald Trump, that Robert Mueller is preparing a report for Congress in which he's going to accuse Donald Trump of obstruction. And it was supposed to happen at the end of the summer. Well, we're now towards the end of August and it hasn't yet happened. Perhaps it won't happen. But by leaving it so late, by leaving it almost right up to the wire, the Republicans, in my opinion, have played into the Democrats' hands. They needed to get their act together last autumn, not leave it so long. And I'm afraid by leaving it so late, they've left themselves very little time to get this thing going and up and running before the midterm elections. And whether they'll be able to sort out things to speak to Steele and Assange, given that there's going to have to be negotiations with both. I mean, neither Steele nor Assange are going to just turn up or give evidence, by video link or whatever. There has to be a negotiation with both of these two people. I mean, it's the time time is limited, and we'll just have to wait and see.
Down to the wire. Down
to the wire. The one thing I would say is that the Republicans are expected to hold on to the Senate in the midterms. So we should still see after the midterms, unless there's some massive anti-Trump, anti-Republican landslide, we should still see the committee, the Senate Intelligence Committee, continuing in much of its present form after the midterm elections. But, we will see. And the Democrats are going to use this as much as they can. And as I said, the Republicans have given them the license, the space to. So we'll just, it's a problem.
It's a problem. Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. Guys, if you like this video, click on the subscribe button down below and click on that notifications bell to get notifications every time we push out a new video. Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. And don't forget, visit the Duran shop, pick up a t-shirt, help support the Duran. Until next time, take care.